Hello, I'm Dr. Sam Hancock of the Emerald Planet and Emerald Planet TV. We come to you on a week-to-week basis from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for those 1,000 best practices, the technology, services, and products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And as we have a planet of 9 billion people by 2038 and possibly 12 to 13 billion by the end of this century, how are we going to be able to take care of all these people on planet Earth? And that's what Emerald Planet's all about. We come to you looking at the solutions, the best practices from around the globe as we create the Emerald Planet. Hello, welcome to the Emerald Planet. We're making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And seeing the long-term impacts of climate change. We're glad to have you. Thank you for being with us. Thank you. And as we're looking around the world and how we're going to address the issues as far as water, power, and to clean the environment over these next 20, 30 years as we move towards 2050, how are we going to be able to do all this? And this gentleman sitting right in front of me, this is Dr. Lawrency Jones, Vice President, International Programs at the Edison Electric Institute. And you've really been thinking about this for a long time, Lawrence. You've been working in the industry. But this whole thing about the smart things everywhere. Mm-hmm. So what does that really mean? Smart things everywhere and everything.
Yeah. Well, increasingly across the globe, we're seeing that technology is being embedded in everything we have, right? We have sensors, we have measurement systems. I mean, everywhere you go, you're being measured. Everything is being measured, which is great. I mean, more information that helps us make better decisions.
Just like your Fitbit, right? On
Just like the Fitbit, right? It allows you to know more about what's happening. So more information is important. But also, what do you do with that information, right? And so information, everything's been measured, sensors all over the place. I've been working on a book now for some time entitled Sensing Africa. Mm-hmm. And my thesis is pretty simple, is that the more you can gather information about Earth systems, man-made systems, and humans, the better we can make decisions. So sensing everything is a way to start thinking about how do we make more informed decisions based on data, based on facts, as opposed to based on emotions and other kinds of things. So that's the wave of the world. I think as we move into the 21st century, the second decade now, starting 2020, mm-hmm. we're going to see this idea of information coming together with things like artificial intelligence. All of these things will help us make better decisions, which will hopefully make us live in a better world. And so I think sensing everything means data from everywhere, means everything is going to be intelligent and smart. Hopefully that will make us smarter.
Well, looking at living in the bubble, so we've got 8 bubbles here that we're looking at as far mm-hmm. as industry priorities. Mm-hmm. I'm going to leave this up for a little bit because I think these are really important, mm-hmm. where we're headed, as we go towards 2050. Yeah. A planet with 9 billion people, now they're saying by 2037. Mm-hmm. So what are you seeing as far as EEI, and how does EEI fit within, around, through each of these 8 bubbles?
So the bubbles up there, these bubbles basically reflect the priorities of EEI, both in the US, but also our members across the globe. And so mm-hmm. as we look at these things, everything from clean energy to resilience to cybersecurity and everything else, workforce development, infrastructure being smarter, all of these things are critical because the energy system now is so complex globally that we have to attack all of these different issues in a holistic way. And so from a prioritization standpoint, what EEI does is we look at these issues through the lens of our members in different countries. So if you take, for example, clean energy, the approach in the US will be different from the approach in sub-Saharan Africa. Mm-hmm. But what is important is that the topic, clean energy, is on everyone's radar. The same thing goes to resilience. Mm-hmm. Wildfires, you have wildfires occurring or bushfires they call in Australia. Mm-hmm. You have wildfires in Portugal, you have wildfires in the US, but they've all been addressed differently. Right. We try from an EEI perspective to find what's common. So all of these issues, whilst they may be global in scale, in terms of how they're happening, they're local in context. And so these priorities we see for 2020, they're going to continue to move on. So every year EEI identify the priorities for the year, but most of these priorities carry on because they're not solved over 1 year. They are a continuum that keeps moving forward.
Yeah, and we're talking about 2020, not the year 2020, but
No,
really
2020s.
the decade
Exactly.
of the
Exactly.
2020s.
Yeah.
And that's very important because we have 10 years, in essence, to try to get this right.
To get a lot of things right.
Yeah, and the whole thing about it, we're looking at all these alternatives as far as the energy mix that you have out there.
Yeah.
Actually, all of these relate directly back to electricity. So how is EEI involved when you go from hydro to solar to wind to nuclear? Many people saying take nuclear off the table.
Yeah.
Many countries now are saying you can't take nuclear off the table if you want to really meet your sustainable development goals.
Yeah.
So looking at this, how do you balance what we see here and also dozens and hundreds of other technologies that we're not looking at in this slide?
Well, I think there are two things. One is it's sort of the immediacy of understanding that we need to provide affordable, reliable energy for everyone. And so keeping that in mind, affordability is key. So all of the resources we have from a diversity standpoint, they're brought to the table, making sure that we're working continuously to make the fleet of energy sources cleaner as we move forward. Which means that it's not about taking things off the table, it's making sure that you're optimizing what you have on the table. And if something on the table is not sort of a viable for a certain region or country, that's why we see differences. When you travel around the world, some countries, they're on a transition to clean energy, but they have a different trajectory, they have a different timeline. What's important is that as you look at these different resources, diversity of supply is very, very important, and that is key. So nuclear is part of the mix, as we've seen from different reports across the globe. We see parts of the world building new nuclear, other parts don't. So the end of the day is everyone, we should respect the diversity of ideas as well as respect the diversity of available resources.
Yeah, and it's all about innovation and how to do things better than what we have ever done it in the past.
Absolutely.
But looking at cybersecurity, I mean, this is really the heart of where we're going in this Internet of Things, because everything was just like, put your refrigerator there and your dishwasher and your lawnmower and all these other things. And they said, we can't protect all that. So how are we going to do that? And again, still keep this Internet of Things, again, this balance as far as where electricity is allowing people to go, new ways, new invention, and new style of living.
Well, I think, cybersecurity is a reality that we have to cope with. And one of the things I always say is that cybersecurity is one of the many risks we're going to be dealing with in the 2020s, right? And so one of the things we've been doing around the world, EEI, is to make sure we can share best practices. Obviously, cybersecurity also requires you having the right workforce, which is not always easy to find. So developing the right talent pool that will provide that. But also working with governments, right? So for example, in the US, we have a very robust collaboration between the power utility sector and various entities within the government to make sure that information sharing is done in the right way. In other countries, they have different approach, but I think across the globe, EI member companies are working very, very closely with the local governments in their respective countries, but also sharing ideas on how you go about protecting the system, both from a physical standpoint, but also one thing that's important, Dr. Sam, is educating your employees. And this is another place where a lot of companies are spending time, because part of the issue is the first and one of the most reliable threat may actually come from someone working in your organization. So making sure you develop, one thing we have with EI, we call it the culture of security, where people are beginning to do a self-assessment as an organization. Where are we in being able to do this?
And allow all the employees to assess themselves.
Well, eventually,
as far as you're opening, the floodgates to the company.
How you behave.
You're keeping them in balance.
That culture mindset is very important.
This whole thing about experience, customers, how do we bring the customers into this whole thing, and how important is the customer to innovation, resiliency, sustainability, reliability? How do they fit into that total mix? So it's a benefit to the long-term viability as far as energy is concerned, but also how they use and not waste and not abuse energy.
I think customer experience is so central to the future of electricity and the future of the energy system. How people experience energy is much more complex than how they experience other resources or other products, because for most people, energy is lights on, lights off. That's the simplest way to look at it, right? Now, how do you get them to look beyond it seen as just a switch? Well, it's because of the services that energy actually enabled. If you think about all the things that are enabled by electricity, people will begin to appreciate it, right? Also, in terms of how you engage with the customer, today a lot of customers, they are digitized, right? They're using their iPads, their iPhones, right? So in terms of communicating with the customer, respecting their time, making sure that when you communicate with the customer, for example, if you have an outage, we're in Washington, D.C. today, if you have an outage, the utility should inform you ahead of time using predictive analytics to say, in the next hour or so, your lights will be back on. Giving customers that active information that they can have as they go about planning, even though there's an outage, but letting them know when you predict it's going to be coming back online. That's how you start building the customer experience.
Yeah.
The same thing
well,
with
also it's trust.
It's
the
trust.
fact is we're giving all this over to our utilities.
Yep.
We're really giving our safety.
Yep.
We're giving all of our data.
Yep.
I mean, let's face it, nobody realizes that we're going to be able to protect ourselves from, the Internet of Things.
Yeah.
But at the same time is that we need to make them part of that whole thing.
Yeah.
But looking at the electric meter, this is telling us much more today than it's ever told in the past.
Absolutely.
What is it telling?
So the meter that's being shown on the screen is one of those old-fashioned meters. I put that there because now we have smarter meters than this, but yet and still, that meter has a lot of information. What's different today is that the information in that meter can easily be accessed by the customer. So customers now, because of having smart meters, they can get a better understanding of their energy use, which they couldn't do in the past, right? So the old meter sort of kept the customer in the blind about what they were doing themselves. See the meter as a Fitbit of the grid.
Looking at where we're going as far as now short-term, long-term, how does that relate to EEI? But more importantly, how does that relate to the energy that we're going to be having for the future over the next 20, 30 years as we go towards 2050? And how do we look at what is truly short-term and what is truly long-term?
So one of the things I'll say to be short and succinct is that infrastructure takes time. Energy infrastructure, they're long-lived assets. On the other hand, digital infrastructure, they're short-lived assets. So how you balance the fact that as we move to a much more digitized society, we still need physical assets that have to be there for a long time. So understanding the long-term and the short-term aspect of infrastructure will help us to design regulation, policy, business models, because at the end of the day, how you invest in those infrastructure requires you to have an understanding of how long you're going to have them available. So the long-term, short-term piece is very important. It's also critical in terms of how we serve our customers.
We got about 15 seconds. New thinking.
New thinking.
Why do we need to have new thinking, and where is that going to take us as we go towards 2050? We got about 10 seconds.
New thing is going to take us where I believe customers are going, because the customers are thinking anew because we're getting a lot of influences from other sectors, and so we have to think new how we serve our customers.
It's fantastic. Dr. Lawrency Jones, Vice President, International Programs, Edison Electric Institute. Dr. Sam Hancock, the President, Executive Director of Emerald Planet, and the Executive Producer, Creator, and the host as far as the Emerald Planet TV. Thank you for being with us as we create the Emerald Planet.